27 banks looked Daymond John in the eye and said no. He held $300,000 in guaranteed orders, yet he was still a broke waiter risking his mother's home. This is how he built a $6 billion empire. Before the private jets and the Shark Tank fame, Daymond John was a kid from Queens with severe dyslexia and empty pockets. He didn't have a business degree or generational wealth. His reality was a grueling shift slinging shrimp and Cheddar Bay biscuits at a local Red Lobster just to keep the lights on. But while his hands were busy with trays, his eyes were on the streets. He watched the explosion of hip-hop culture happening right in his own neighborhood, feeling the energy and the fashion of a movement that ignored people like him. He dreamed of creating something that spoke directly to his community. He just needed a way in, even if the world saw him as nothing more than a waiter. The struggle wasn't just about money. It was the quiet, grinding weight of being stuck. Daymond was a young man trying to find his footing, while the world seemed determined to keep him serving seafood. Every day he watched kids in his neighborhood wearing expensive designer clothes that weren't even made for them. These brands actively ignored the hip-hop community, and Daymond felt that disconnect like a physical blow. He wanted to start a clothing line, but reality kept punching back. He had no capital, zero manufacturing connections, and a learning disability that made traditional schooling feel like a prison. Every time he managed to save a few dollars, a new bill would wipe him out completely. When he spoke about business ideas, people laughed. They told him to stick to the menu and stop dreaming so big. They wanted him to accept his place as the guy who brings extra napkins, and that expectation started to crush his spirit. Then came the suffocating reality of trying to force a dream into existence with absolutely nothing. It wasn't just one failure, it was a relentless cascade of closed doors. Daymond tried to pitch his ideas to local store owners, but they wouldn't even look up from their registers. He was exhausted, working double shifts at Red Lobster until his feet ached and his skin smelled like garlic and fried fish. The friends who promised to support his ventures suddenly stopped answering his calls when the actual work began. He was completely alone. He would come home to a dark apartment, exhausted to his bones, wondering if the skeptics were right. Maybe he was just delusional. The shame of being a grown man still scraping by on tips, unable to even buy his mother a decent gift, ate away at his soul. The avalanche of his own life was burying him alive, and the exit was nowhere in sight. This was the absolute lowest point. It is the kind of visceral, quiet despair that settles into your bones when you realize you are completely trapped. Daymond stood in the middle of his cramped room, staring at his meager savings, realizing it wasn't even enough to cover the rent, let alone start a global fashion brand. Quitting was the most logical choice he had left. It was the safe choice. Everyone expected him to just put his head down, work his restaurant shifts, and fade into the background of a city that swallows dreams whole. The heavy, suffocating silence of that room felt like a grave for his ambitions. He was a dyslexic waiter with no future, no money, and no respect. He had nothing left to lose because he had absolutely nothing to begin with. The dream of a clothing line felt like a childish fantasy that he finally needed to let go of for good. But then, a mundane, almost accidental moment changed the trajectory of his life. It wasn't a grand revelation with a choir of angels. It was Good Friday, 1989. Daymond saw a tie-top ski cap in a De La Soul music video and went to Uptown Manhattan to buy one for $20. When he brought it home, his mother, Margot, looked at the price tag and was absolutely appalled. She refused to let her son get ripped off by a simple hat. She handed him $40, pointed him toward a fabric store, and told him to buy the raw materials. She wasn't just giving him money. She was going to teach him how to sew, and that single lesson would change everything. That $40 was the seed of a global empire, but on that first night, it just felt like a gamble. Daymond bought candy cane striped fabric that matched his favorite sneakers and sat down at a sewing machine. He was a big man with awkward hands, trying to navigate a needle and thread while his mother watched over his shoulder. It was slow and frustrating work. He stayed up all night, pushing through exhaustion to finish exactly 80 hats. The next afternoon, at 3 o'clock on Good Friday, he stood on a gritty corner outside the Coliseum Mall in Queens. He didn't have a storefront or a marketing team. He just had a garbage bag full of homemade wool caps. Within a single hour, he sold every last one of them for $10 apiece. He walked away with $800 in cash. The gap between his dream and his reality had finally been bridged by his own two hands. What followed was the unsexy, grueling middle that destroys most entrepreneurs before they even start. FUBU was officially born, but for the first 2 years, it was funded entirely by shrimp and biscuits. Daymond lived a punishing double life that would have broken a lesser man. His alarm would scream at 7 in the morning. He would spend his morning sewing hats, tagging them, and dragging them to the post office until 1 in the afternoon. By 4 o'clock, he was clocking in at Red Lobster, wearing a crisp white shirt and taking orders for tips until midnight. Then he would drag himself back home, tally up his meager orders, and sew until 2 in the morning. He did this every single day. He survived on 4 hours of sleep, constant needle pricks, and endless rejections from local boutiques that didn't see the vision. If you respect the kind of person who outworks their circumstances, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now, because the hustle Daymond pulls off next is the stuff of legend. In August of 1994, Daymond and his co-founders took a massive gamble. They flew to the Magic Menswear trade show in Las Vegas with no booth and no tickets to get inside. So they did what hustlers do. They rented a cheap hotel room, laid their clothes out on the beds, and literally snuck retail buyers up the elevator. Miraculously, the hustle worked. They left Las Vegas holding $300,000 in purchase orders. But here is the part that usually kills the dream. To fulfill those orders, they needed raw materials, and that required a loan. Daymond took those guaranteed orders to 27 different banks, begging for a chance. And 27 times, those bankers looked at him and said no. I want to know in the comments, would you have walked away after the 10th rejection or the 20th? Because Daymond was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground was starting to crumble. This was the defining moment for the young man from Queens. Daymond had $300,000 in demand, but $0 in the bank. He could have framed those orders as a tragic souvenir of what almost was, and gone back to serving seafood forever. But he refused to be a cautionary tale. He refused to let 27 men in suits tell him what his future was worth. He was fueled by a stubborn, relentless rage against a system designed to keep him out. He went to his mother with a desperate, terrifying proposition. They were going to bet the only thing they had left. They were going to bet the house. Margot John believed in her son so deeply that she took out a second mortgage on her home for $100,000. They literally gutted the house, moving the furniture out, and moving industrial sewing machines in to fulfill those Vegas orders. That ultimate bet triggered an accelerating wave of success that no one could have predicted. The years of grinding in the dark finally started to pay off in the light. The culture embraced FUBU with a fierce loyalty because they knew it was authentic. Then came the explosion. LL Cool J, a kid from the same neighborhood, wore a FUBU hat in a massive Gap commercial, sneakily shouting out the brand on national television. Suddenly, the momentum became unstoppable. The very same institutions and retailers that had laughed at Daymond were now desperately blowing up his phone, begging for inventory. The brand exploded from the streets of Queens to the global stage, capturing the spirit of hip-hop culture. The compound effect of those late nights and bleeding fingers had created a tidal wave that the fashion industry simply could not ignore. FUBU didn't just survive, it achieved total transcendence. It exploded into a global powerhouse, eventually amassing over $6 billion in worldwide retail sales. Daymond John went from a broke, dyslexic waiter to a titan of industry and a star on Shark Tank. But the real victory wasn't the private jets or the billions of dollars. The real victory was who he became while he was climbing. He proved that a brand created for us, by us, could dominate the mainstream without losing its soul. He transformed his deepest insecurities and his harshest rejections into the armor that protected his empire. And once he reached the summit, he didn't pull up the ladder. He reached back down, investing his own millions into countless other struggling entrepreneurs who were waiting for someone to finally say yes. He became the bank that he never had, changing thousands of lives in the process. If you found value in this story of resilience, subscribe to join us for the next one. Daymond started with $40 and a sewing machine, proving that your current circumstances are never your final destination. The universal truth from Daymond John's journey is this: capital does not create innovation. Desperation does the work. When you have no money in your pocket and no safety net beneath you, you are forced to use the only asset that cannot be taken away: your mind. Those 27 bank denials were not a curse or a sign to stop. They were the greatest gift he ever received because they forced him to rely on his own relentless, unshakable hustle. If you are sitting around waiting for funding, waiting for permission, or waiting for the perfect time to start, you have already lost. If you want more stories of people who turned their rock bottom into a global empire, subscribe to the channel right now. Daymond John built a $6 billion empire because he refused to take no for an answer, even when the entire financial system slammed the door in his face. He risked his mother's roof to build his own floor, and he won. Now, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to be brutally honest in the comments down below. If you had $300,000 in orders but $0 in the bank, would you have the courage to mortgage your mother's house for your dream? Tell me what you would do. Make sure to subscribe for more stories of the hustle that changes the world. Until next time, remember that your greatest disadvantage might just be your ultimate weapon.